You're a few miles in, the trail has settled into a rhythm, and then something feels off. A zipper fails, the weather turns, or you reach for a piece of gear that suddenly makes no sense. That's when you realize you packed the wrong gear. It hits at an awkward point, far enough into the trip that turning around already feels like you're bailing, but early enough that you're still trying to figure out how big the mistake actually is. You're standing there realizing that a decision you made at home doesn't work out here. Sometimes it's obvious right away. You stop for a break, pull something out of your pack, and there it is. The stove you brought uses a different fuel canister than the one you packed. The gloves you meant for winter weather somehow got swapped with the ultralight liners. Or you unzip your ditty bag and realize your headlamp batteries are still sitting back on the kitchen counter. Any of these can introduce a bit of panic when it happens to you out on the trail. What you do in the next few minutes usually decides whether this stays a good trip or becomes a frustrating one. Because the biggest mistake people make at this point is emotional, not technical. Panic leads to rush decisions, and rush decisions tend to stack on top of the original mistake. Before you do anything else, stop walking, take a drink of water, and take inventory of what's actually wrong. Ask yourself a few simple questions. What is the specific problem? Is it discomfort, inconvenience, or a genuine risk? A missing spork is annoying. Realizing you brought the wrong rated sleeping bag when the nights are expecting sub-freezing temps is a different category entirely. This is where experience helps, and I've made a lot of gear mistakes over 300 plus nights on the trail, but you don't need a decade's worth of trips. You just need to separate inconvenience from danger. And this kind of decision making, figuring out what actually matters versus what just feels stressful, is what I focus on a lot here on the channel, so consider subscribing if that interests you. Most gear mistakes live in the first category, even though they may feel dramatic in the moment. Yes, maybe you won't have a headlamp on this trip, but were you expecting to do night hiking? Can the moon in the night sky provide enough ambient light for you to get around camp? Can you just use your phone's flashlight if you're conservative with the battery? The trail has a way of amplifying small annoyances, especially when you're tired or hungry. And once you've identified the real issue, you can start working the problem instead of reacting to it. One of the best habits you can develop as a backpacker is thinking in systems rather than individual items. When one piece fails or is wrong, the system can often compensate. If your shelter system isn't ideal, can your clothing help block wind or add warmth? If your sleep system is colder than you planned, can you eat more calories before bed, change your campsite selection, or adjust your layering strategy? If your cooking setup is off, can you cold soak, share with other backpackers, or simplify your meals? This is where people who hike a lot tend to stay calmer. They've learned that gear overlaps more than it seems. A foam sit pad becomes extra insulation. A rain jacket becomes a wind shell. A pack liner becomes a foot vapor barrier in cold conditions. None of these are elegant solutions, but elegance is optional out here. What matters is understanding what each item can do beyond its primary purpose. The more flexible your mindset and your gear, the less boxed in you feel by one bad choice. And I'm curious, what's one piece of gear you've ended up using in a totally different way than you originally planned on a trip? Drop yours down in the comments. All right, another mistake people make is trying to force the original plan to work no matter what. But that plan was usually built around assuming the trip would go, well, as planned. And one of those assumptions just broke. Adjusting your mileage, your campsite selection, or even the duration of your trip isn't failure. It's decision making. If your insulation is underrated for the temps, you might stop earlier to avoid descending into a colder valley. If your shoes are causing too much pain or blisters, you might turn around before committing to a section that removes your exit option. Experienced backpackers adjust constantly, but most of those adjustments are invisible because nothing dramatic really happens afterwards. The trip just continues, slightly reshaped. Learning when to adapt versus when to just push through comes from noticing whether things are getting better or slowly getting worse as the day goes on. One of the quieter challenges of realizing you packed the wrong gear is mental. It's easy to label a trip as ruined and mentally check out if you mess something up. When that happens, every small issue starts feeling bigger, and there's a tendency to stop noticing the good parts altogether. A more useful mindset is to treat the trip as a problem-solving exercise instead of a test you're trying to pass. You're still outside, you're still moving through a landscape that most people never see on foot, and you're actively learning something that will stick far longer than a flawless weekend usually will. Some of the most valuable gear decisions show up when you're a little uncomfortable and you start figuring out what actually matters to you when you're out on a trip. And those lessons tend to show up again later when the stakes are higher and decisions matter more. And now you'll be better prepared to handle them. And that approach works surprisingly well. Well, right up until it doesn't. So there's no way around this part. Sometimes packing the wrong gear means the right decision is to bail. This is a decision that most experienced backpackers eventually learn how to make after doing enough trips. Cold, wet conditions with insufficient insulation, extended exposure above tree line without the right shelter, foot issues caused by poorly fitted shoes or boots that will only get worse. These aren't like tests of your character, they're decisions about risk. The trick is recognizing these situations early when turning around is still simple. The longer you wait, the fewer options you have, and the more pressure builds around a decision that should ideally kind of be boring and straightforward to make. Backing out of a trip is still part of the trip. You gathered information, you tested your assumptions, and you left with more experience than you had before. That experience still pays dividends later, even if it doesn't feel like it back at the parking lot. And I have definitely been there. The first time I ever tried hammock camping, I had no real experience pitching a tarp. The forecast looked decent, but it ended up turning super windy and rainy that night, and I only had those thin shepherd hook stakes, and I was trying to stake the tarp down in loose dirt. By midnight, every time a gust of wind came through, a stake would pop out. I'd crawl out of my warm sleeping bag into the cold rain and wind, untangle the guy lines, reset the stake, climb back in, and about 10 minutes later, another stake would blow. By 2 a.m., it was clear that I wasn't sleeping that night, so I packed everything up and hiked back to the parking lot. Yes, it sucked, but I took the opportunity to learn from that mistake. I researched how people actually stake tarps in the wind. I learned a few simple tricks on YouTube and ordered some MSR groundhogs, which are proper Y-stake stakes with real holding power. That solved the issue for that setup on that trip, but gear mistakes don't stop showing up just because you fixed the last one. Even with experience, mistakes still happen. Conditions change, trips evolve, our bodies can change. What worked last year doesn't always work now. And the idea that there's a perfect setup that solves everything is appealing, but not how real trips work. On the trail, what ends up mattering more is noticing what's happening and being willing to adjust. And the more trips you do, the more you realize that packing mistakes aren't interruptions to your experience. They're part of it. And if you want more videos about dialing in your backpacking setup, check out this next one. It breaks down how to build a gear system that adapts when things don't go as planned. So take those lessons out there with you, adjust when you need to, and I'll see you on the trail.